General Hospital spoilers reveal that Dalton's confession did not come in a blaze of guilt or a moment of compassion. It came in the suffocating grip of pressure. As his carefully woven lies began to implode under the weight of discovery. For months, whispers had circulated through Port Charles about the truth behind Britt's death. About the nature of her identity, and about the eerie silence that followed Liesl's grief. But no one, was prepared for the scale of the truth that Dalton finally revealed when cornered. The confession wasn't just a footnote to an old mystery. It was the epicenter of a narrative shockwave that would rip through the town's already fragile web of loyalty, science, and personal legacy. According to Dalton, Britt was never the daughter of Liesl. She was the product of a clandestine genetic operation, Project Prometheus, a black-budget experiment in biological engineering designed to produce enhanced human subjects with elevated cognitive and physical abilities. Embedded into real families as part of a social integration phase. The woman everyone knew as Britt was an engineered being, created not out of love, not out of nature's randomness, but out of scientific ambition, spliced from selective DNA traits, incubated in an artificial womb, and implanted into the world with a fabricated history and a purpose she herself never knew. The entire narrative of Liesl's motherhood, her sacrifices, her possessive love, and her unwavering grief, was built on a lie so massive that it threatened to drive her mad. What Dalton exposed wasn't just a scientific crime, it was an emotional decimation, a complete erasure of what it means to belong. Dalton detailed how the experiment had been sanctioned decades ago. Buried in secret funding from WSB offshoots and covered by layers of false identities and fraudulent medical records. He had been recruited not just as a scientist but as a psychological architect. Tasked with creating memory triggers and identity frames that would survive scrutiny even from the subjects themselves. Britt was one of several engineered offspring implanted into real families to measure adaptive behavior and long-term emotional capacity. But something went wrong. Britt wasn't meant to live as long as she did. Her unexpected resilience, her deviation from the projected behavior, and her emotional independence made her a liability to the program. When she began questioning her origins, subtly, intuitively, Dalton received orders to redirect her, but by then, the machine had failed. She was too deeply embedded. Her emotions had become too real. Her existence, once controlled, became a variable. And then she died, not by the hands of the project, but by sheer randomness, a violent act from Heather. Unconnected to the scientific web she never even knew she was part of. But her death sent ripples. The project panicked. Dalton was ordered to erase all traces of her creation, but he couldn't. Liesl's grief was too loud. Jason's memories too detailed. And Britt's legacy too stained with individuality. Now, with Dalton's confession exposed, chaos spreads like infection. Liesl, upon hearing the truth, breaks, not in fury, but in collapse. Her reality is gutted. The daughter she thought she raised, loved, mourned, was a fabrication, a ghost in human skin. But her love was real. The memories were real. The pain, the guilt, the moments, they were all real. And that contradiction begins to consume her. She lashes out, first in denial, then in rage. She vows to dismantle whatever remains of the project that stole her daughter's identity and gave her nothing but the illusion of motherhood. But deeper inside, a part of her refuses to accept it. To Liesl, science has always been both salvation and destruction. But this was betrayal on a level she could not understand. Jason, too, is shaken. His history with Britt was tangled, messy. But real. If she wasn't who she claimed to be, then what were those nights of vulnerability, those fleeting glimpses of something almost tender? He finds himself questioning his own memories. Dissecting every moment with her, searching for signs that he missed. And the more he searches, the more he realizes that whether Britt was engineered or born, her humanity was undeniable. But even that understanding doesn't soothe the ache of deception. The realization that someone he once trusted was built in a lab, manipulated like a chess piece, makes him question everything. Not just about Britt, but about himself, about WSB, about the world he's tried to leave behind. Others begin to question their realities. Nina, having shared bitter conflict and rare reconciliation with Britt, spirals into confusion. Was their connection ever real? Did Britt ever love her? Was she programmed to manipulate? Or did she rebel against her own design? Every relationship Britt ever had comes under a microscope, and the town's collective memory fractures into suspicion and paranoia. The legacy of Project Prometheus, once buried, now poisons everything. Meanwhile, the deeper horror lies ahead. Dalton's confession isn't just about Britt. It's about the existence of others like her. He admits, in the final moments of his interrogation, that Britt was not the only one. There are more. Subjects who survived. Subjects who still don't know who, or what, they are. Port Charles may be home to more fabricated lives, more hidden assets, more victims of a science that treated humanity like a variable. This possibility sends the town into turmoil. Who is real? Who isn't? Who can be trusted? The boundaries between authenticity and artificiality blur, and the very nature of identity becomes a threat. And then comes the next twist. Britt might still be alive. Not the same Britt, but a failed clone, a memory copy, or a hybrid subject born as a contingency. A woman who looks like Britt, sounds like Britt, but doesn't remember being Britt. The program had a backup, and now she's surfacing. Whether she's a safety net, a replacement, or a final experiment remains unknown. But her emergence throws gasoline onto an already burning fire. Liesl sees her and breaks all over again. Jason sees her and doesn't know whether to protect or destroy. The town sees her and begins to fracture, torn between mourning and suspicion. The question now isn't whether Britt was real. It's whether anything in Port Charles ever truly was. Dalton's confession may have exposed the past, but it also unlocked a terrifying future. One where secrets are manufactured, relationships are test subjects, and the people of Port Charles are pawns in a game they never agreed to play. As Liesl begins her vendetta. As Jason starts digging deeper into Project Prometheus, and as the new Britt begins her journey of self-awareness, one truth becomes unshakable: Port Charles has entered a new era. One ruled not by love or justice, but by the cold hands of science and the haunting realization that the line between human and experiment has already been crossed. One of the darkest obsessions now gripping Port Charles begins and ends with Liesl, whose grief over Britt has never truly faded, only hardened, grown quiet, and burrowed itself deep within her psyche. What many assume to be a mother's sorrow has quietly evolved into something far more dangerous, a desperate fixation on rewriting the past. On protecting a secret so immense that its very existence threatens to shatter every fragile truth the town believes. This obsession, this unrelenting need to shield what remains of her daughter's legacy, is driving Liesl to the edge, and beyond. And now, with Dalton's confession shaking the town to its core and whispers of Project Prometheus spreading like wildfire, the pressure on Liesl is unbearable. Because the truth she's hiding is one no one else yet knows, Britt may not be gone entirely. Liesl has been protecting more than a memory. She has been protecting the remnants of an experiment she never fully understood, an echo of her daughter hidden away, unfinished, unstable, alive. In secret. Liesl has concealed what remains of a second version of Britt, created through Victor's stolen data. Preserved through experimental cellular regeneration techniques far beyond the bounds of ethical science. She didn't mean to. It wasn't part of her plan. It was something she discovered after Victor's supposed death, something hidden in the bowels of one of his abandoned labs. A chamber. A figure. Not fully formed. Not awake. But there, breathing. And in that moment, Liesl did what any mother driven mad by grief and guilt might do. She claimed the secret. She swore herself to silence. And she began studying what she had no business touching. It wasn't about science. It wasn't about morality. It was about love, or the illusion of it. A chance to keep Britt, or something like her, from ever leaving her again. But now, As Dalton's truth threatens to expose everything, Liesl feels the walls closing in. Every day brings her closer to the inevitable, the world finding out what she's done, what she's hidden, and what her beloved daughter really was. This isn't just about a mother keeping a clone in the shadows. This is about the breakdown of identity. This is about mourning a child and simultaneously holding onto something that may never truly be her. And as whispers begin to circulate about Victor's cloning project, and as Jason and Anna grow more suspicious, Liesl becomes increasingly erratic, paranoid, and reclusive. She lashes out at those who ask too many questions. She isolates herself from the hospital. She watches the world through a fractured lens, terrified of losing her daughter a second time, even if the version she has is little more than a shell. Her fear is not just about exposure. It's about choice. If the town discovers Britt's duplicate, if they drag her into the light, what happens next? Will they destroy her? Will they study her? Will they declare her inhuman? Liesl cannot bear the thought. To her, this new version of Britt is no less real than the first. She has her face. She may one day have her memories. And perhaps, just perhaps, she may love Liesl back. But as the secret weighs heavier and heavier on her conscience, Liesl begins to unravel. Her nightmares grow more vivid. She sees Britt's face in every hallway. She hears her voice in the silence of the night. And she knows that time is running out. This obsession has mutated into full-blown panic, and with it comes missteps, traces left behind. Inconsistencies in her story, medical files that don't quite match. Others begin to notice. Finn raises questions about her erratic behavior. Mina begins to suspect that Liesl is hiding something far more personal than grief. And Jason, whose instincts have always been razor-sharp, begins to dig into the remains of Victor's network, following breadcrumbs that may lead him straight to the truth. Liesl's world is collapsing, and the closer the truth gets to the surface, the more volatile she becomes. At the heart of it all is a singular, terrifying truth: Liesl is not just mourning a daughter. She is trying to recreate her. To bring her back through science, through memory, through sheer emotional force. But in doing so, she has placed herself, and everyone around her, in immense danger. Because the figure she's hidden away is not stable. She is incomplete, emotionally unpredictable, and potentially a danger to herself and others. Liesl sees her as Britt. But what lies beneath the surface may be something very different. A ticking time bomb of biology and broken identity. The tragedy is almost Shakespearean. Liesl, once a brilliant doctor, now finds herself blinded by motherly desperation. She isn't acting from reason. She's acting from pain. She cannot let go. And as the past claws its way back into the present, she finds herself spiraling into a web of lies, cover-ups, and reckless choices that can only end in heartbreak. The transformation of grief into obsession, of loss into delusion, is nearly complete. And as Port Charles braces for the inevitable explosion of truth, one question remains: when the town discovers what Liesl has done, will they see a monster, or a mother who simply could not let her daughter go? Because in the end, the line between love and madness, between science and horror, has already been crossed. And Liesl, once seen as a woman who would die for her daughter, now lives in fear that she may have doomed them both. Jason had been through war, trauma, resurrection, and betrayal. He had looked death in the face, lived as a ghost in his own life, and returned to find everything he once believed reshaped by time and treachery. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared him for the revelation that shattered his core: Britt was never truly Britt. Not in the way he knew her. Not in the way he trusted her. She wasn't the daughter of Liesl by blood, but rather the result of a long-buried experiment, Project Prometheus, an operation so morally corrupt and deeply calculated that it rewrote the very definition of family, humanity, and identity. This wasn't just a scientific misstep. It was a psychological ambush, and Jason, for once, didn't see it coming. The confession from Dalton was not just shocking, it was transformational. With every word the scientist uttered, Jason's memories were tainted. Moments of intimacy with Britt, her vulnerability, her strength, her wit, all now seemed stained with the possibility that she had been engineered to be that way. The idea that her personality might have been curated in a lab, her emotions monitored, her choices manipulated, filled him with a rage he could barely contain. But it wasn't rage at Britt. It was rage at the puppeteers, at Victor, at Dalton, and perhaps, even at Liesl, whose silence now felt like complicity. Jason wasn't a man who allowed his emotions to govern him. But now, emotion was the mission. This wasn't just about closure. This was about confronting a new, escalating threat, one that blurred the line between science and identity, between love and control. Because the more he dug, the more he realized Project Prometheus didn't end with Britt. It didn't end with Victor's death. It was alive. Still operating. And still experimenting. The clone, Britt's clone, was real. Liesl had found her, hidden her, protected her, and refused to tell anyone. And Jason understood why. Because Liesl wasn't just trying to preserve her daughter's memory. She was trying to preserve a second chance. But in doing so, she'd opened the door to something dangerous. This new Britt wasn't just unfinished, she was unstable. Her DNA bore genetic memory markers from Victor's legacy, possible enhancements to memory, physical endurance. Maybe even psychological programming. She had no idea who she truly was. She looked like Britt, but she wasn't her. Not entirely. And Jason knew what that meant. She could be turned, used, controlled. Worse still, this new Britt wasn't just a danger to herself, she was a target. Because Victor's true plan wasn't about love or family. It was about domination. Jason now believed that Victor created these clones not just to fill emotional voids, but to design tools, people who could pass for loved ones, influence power structures, take over corporations, gain trust, and infiltrate entire legacies. If Britt had succeeded emotionally, if she had won hearts and built connections, then her clone was Victor's proof of concept. She could be used to manipulate Port Charles from within, quietly, deeply, permanently. Jason, always a soldier at heart, shifted into tactical mode. He began retracing every known step of Victor's network, labs in Switzerland, dummy corporations, encrypted files hidden deep within WSB black archives. What he uncovered stunned even him. Genetic sequencing lists that included not only Britt but other familiar names, names of people in Port Charles. A theory began to grow in his mind, horrifying and surreal. What if Britt wasn't the only one? What if other loved ones had been replaced, cloned, or genetically manipulated? Could this explain erratic behavior from certain people, memory lapses, or uncharacteristic decisions? That question began to fester. What if the town had already been infiltrated by other products? What if Port Charles was now part of a grander Cassadine experiment? Already in motion? Jason's mind raced through the implications: hospital access, court control, family fortunes, all under the possible influence of synthetic or altered individuals. It wasn't paranoia. It was war. But even as the conspiracy widened, his focus remained on Britt. The version he knew was gone. Murdered in a tragic, meaningless attack. But her essence, her reflection, lived on in a woman who didn't even understand her own existence. Jason wasn't sure whether to destroy the clone or protect her. Because the clone was not to blame. She didn't ask to be created. She didn't ask to carry the burden of another's life. But if left unchecked, she could become a weapon in someone else's hands. She could be programmed. Used to manipulate Jason himself. Used to infiltrate the Quartermaines. Used to cripple Port Charles from the inside out. He approached Liesl with a mix of fury and heartbreak. He saw in her eyes the torment of a mother who had lost everything and clung desperately to a second chance she could barely control. Liesl begged for time, for understanding, for mercy. She swore the clone wasn't a threat, that she had kept her hidden to protect her, not from the world, but from Victor's enemies. But Jason couldn't ignore the truth. Keeping her hidden was dangerous. Keeping her secret was even worse. Jason knew what had to be done. He had to find the clone. He had to understand what she knew, what she felt, and whether she could ever be more than Victor's shadow. But he also knew that others were closing in. The WSB had been alerted. Sidwell's men were sniffing around. And someone, possibly Dalton's old associates, was determined to retrieve the clone. Not to care for her. Not to heal her. But to reprogram her. The race was on. Jason now faced one of the hardest decisions of his life, not whether to destroy a threat, but whether to save one. Could he protect the legacy of Britt, even if she no longer remembered him? Could he ensure that what Victor built wouldn't be used to destroy everything they fought for? And could he live with the reality that the woman he once loved might now exist as a stranger, watching him through eyes that looked identical, but carried none of the soul he remembered? The answers weren't clear. But Jason didn't need clarity. He needed action. And in this new war, of science, memory, identity, and power, he would fight the only way he knew how, with precision, discipline, and heart. Because in a town where the line between real and created had been erased, Jason knew the truth would come at a cost. And this time, it might be one he couldn't afford to pay. The truth, when it finally emerged, sent shockwaves through Port Charles in a way no one could have anticipated. It wasn't about the resurrection of Britt. It wasn't about cloning or stolen DNA. It was about blood, raw, undeniable, binding blood. And the revelation that Sidwell, the man known for his ruthless ambitions and chilling manipulations, was in fact Britt's biological father, was a bomb no one could have prepared for. It shattered every truth Liesl had clung to and twisted every thread of Britt's already complicated identity into a tangled, painful web of secrets, betrayal, and legacy. This wasn't just a revelation, it was an obsession coming to light, an obsession that had been slowly, deliberately building in Sidwell's silence. He had known all along. He had watched Britt from afar. He had interfered in the shadows. He had shaped her story, her circumstances, her downfall. And all of it had been rooted in a twisted vision of control masked as paternal instinct. Now, with the revelation exposed, it wasn't just about one girl's paternity, it was about a legacy of manipulation, obsession, and twisted science designed to ensure that Sidwell would always have his mark on the world. Even if it had to be carved through his own daughter. Liesl, broken and furious, had concealed the truth for decades. She had convinced herself that keeping Sidwell's identity hidden was the only way to protect Britt. She had buried the trauma of what happened between her and Sidwell, denied it, rewritten it. But the science had always been there. The opportunity had always been there. When Victor had taken Sidwell under his wing as an investor and secret operative, the pieces began to align. And what Liesl thought she had escaped came roaring back in the form of scientific obsession and emotional warfare. Sidwell didn't just want to reclaim Britt, he wanted to rewrite her. He didn't see her as a daughter. He saw her as a prototype, an extension of himself. That's why he had funded Victor's darkest projects. That's why he had taken an interest in Dalton's experimentation. Because he believed that what Liesl had tried to keep from him, he could take back through manipulation and replication. If Britt wouldn't love him, he would create a version of her that did. If Liesl denied him fatherhood, he would assert it through dominance, through cloning, through the erasure of free will. And now, with Project Prometheus exposed and Britt's origins revealed, the entire town is thrown into chaos. Jason is stunned, trying to reconcile the woman he once loved with the twisted roots of her creation. Liesl is on the verge of mental collapse, knowing that every sacrifice she made, every secret she kept, may have only fed Sidwell's obsession. And the clone, silent, watching, incomplete, becomes the symbol of it all. A living question of identity. Of legacy. Of violation. What's worse? Sidwell isn't backing down. He claims his paternity like a flag of conquest. He doesn't apologize. He doesn't grieve. He claims. And with his influence spreading, politically, medically, and through every institution he's invested in, Port Charles finds itself under siege not by violence, but by psychological warfare. If Sidwell is Britt's father, what rights does he now have to the clone? What influence can he exert over Liesl's choices? What leverage can he hold over Jason, Michael, or even Sonny? This revelation shifts everything. Liesl is no longer just a grieving mother. She's a woman trying to prevent a monster from reclaiming a piece of himself through a daughter who never asked for it. Jason is no longer just a protector. He's a man at the crossroads of science and vengeance, trying to decide whether the clone deserves redemption or eradication. And Sidwell? He's not just a villain now. He's a father. A father who never loved, but who now obsesses, dangerously, irreversibly. The town is trembling beneath the weight of this truth. Because this isn't just a scandal. It's a legacy war. And no one, not Jason, not Liesl, not the clone herself, will walk away from it unchanged.